We have already covered addition and subtraction, and now we're going to move on to multiplying. As you know, we always like to start with something that you know so that we can move forward from there in teaching you something new based on something that you already feel comfortable with. So that's where we're going to start today. My highlighter isn't working though. That is disappointing. See if anything's working. Good. Okay, so you already know that 4 times 4 is 16, and I'm pretty sure you can continue this going down. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 0 is 0. These are things that you learned in elementary school. We always look for a pattern in math to see how rules are created. A lot of times kids think that math rules make no sense because they just are rules that someone made up. They're not actually just random rules, they're based on patterns that someone noticed. So if we look here, we can see that 16 to 12 decreases by 4, and 12 to 8 decreases by 4. 8 to 4 minus 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. So as we decrease the number we're multiplying by, we are forced into what number has to go here based on this pattern of every time decreasing by 4. 0 minus 4 is negative 4. And when we look, that means that when we multiply a positive by a negative, the answer has to be a negative answer. So negative 4 minus 4 is negative 8. Again, that's a positive times a negative is a negative. And if we decrease by 4 again, we get negative 12. Again, showing that a positive times a negative is a negative. So we started with something that you knew, which was that when you multiply positives, you get a positive answer. And then based on the pattern that was created, we now have learned that a positive times a negative has to be a negative answer. Does that same thing work for dividing? So we're going to come over here and do division. 16 divided by 4 is 4. That's something you already know. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1. And 0 divided by 4 is 0. These are things you already knew. And you know that a positive divided by a positive is a positive. Let's take a look at the pattern and see if we can discover what happens when you have a negative divided by a positive. Well, this pattern, it's pretty easy to see, decreases by 1 each time. 0 decreased by 1 has to be negative 1. So when we have a negative divided by a positive, we get a negative answer. This has to be negative 2 just based on our pattern. So a negative divided by a positive is a negative answer. And again here, a negative divided by a positive is a negative answer. So again, we've learned that that pattern holds. So we already knew that a positive times a positive gives us a positive answer. And what we just proved based on the pattern is that a positive times a negative is going to give us a negative answer. What we still have yet to discover is what happens when you have a negative divided by or multiplied by a negative. What happens there? So I'm actually going to start. I wish I could highlight. Why can't I highlight? I'm going to try a different color. There we go. With this information right here, I'm going to come down to a new table to see if I can figure out what happens with two negatives. So up above, we just discovered that a negative times a positive gives us a negative answer. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. And negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. So we based this on the table up above that a positive times a negative gives us a negative answer. Now, in order to move down into negative times a negative, we look for a pattern. You have to look really closely at this because at first, a lot of people say we're subtracting 4. But look, if you look at a number line, this is 0 and this is negative 16. To get to negative 12, you're actually moving closer to 0. Negative 4 and then 0. I'll actually just get rid of that. Okay, so these are all increasing by 4. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. So 0 plus 4 is 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8, and 8 plus 4 is 12. So what happens when you have a negative times a negative? What, based on the pattern, was your answer forced to be? Was forced to be a positive. Let's see if that holds true for division. 16 divided by negative 4 is negative 4. 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3. 8 divided by negative 4 is negative 2. You can see this pattern forming. 4 divided by negative 4 is negative 1. 0 divided by negative 4 is 0. So we're again getting into the negative divided by a negative, and we're looking at a pattern. Again, a lot of people say, oh, we're decreasing by 4. But again, if you're starting here at negative 4, as you move closer to 0, you're increasing. So these are all adding 1. They're becoming less negative. So 0 plus 1 is 1, and then plus 1 is 2, and plus 1 is 3. So what happens when you have a negative times a negative, we just learned you get a positive answer. So go back up here. Negative times a negative is actually a positive. So now we proved it. So you can really believe it when we use a little trick. Some kids just like to know the rules. They just like to know that if you have a positive times a negative, it's a negative, and a negative times a negative is a positive. Some kids like to know the rule. Some kids told me they learned last year something just called the triangle trick, which looks like this. And you cross off the sign that you used. Some kids learned Dorito Man, which is the same idea, but it's upside down. And this is what's in your notes. Looks like this. And it just kind of looks like a funny looking man with closed eyes and a super weird nose. Okay. So the way, if you don't memorize the rule, the way we use the trick is like this. You say, okay, my first number is a positive 5. I'm going to cross off the positive. My second number is a negative 6. I'm going to cross off the negative. What's left is the sign of my answer. So this is negative. 5 times 6 is 30. That's how you use the triangle if you're struggling with the rule. Let's try B. 11 times 9, I know, is 99. Let's see if that's going to be a positive or a negative 99. The first number is negative, so I cross off a negative sign. The second number is negative, cross off the other negative. My answer is what's left. So that's a positive 99. Most kids start to get the hang of it right about here. 15 divided by 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. Let's determine if it's a positive or a negative 5. 15 is positive, so I'll cross that out. 3 is negative, I'll cross that out. My answer should be negative 5. Negative 27 divided by 3. 27 is negative, 3 is positive. My answer is negative 9. In E, we now have 3 factors. You can multiply in any order. If you remember from your past, that's called the commutative property. Some people like to go just right in order. -2 times 5 is -10, and then bring down your -4. When you have a number next to parenthesis like this, it indicates multiplication, and a negative times a negative is going to give you a positive. So this is positive 40. Some people like to multiply their negatives first. So they do -2 times -4, which is 8, and then multiply the positives together to get 40. Either way is absolutely correct because order does not change the value when you're multiplying or adding. Now, what does this mean? -4 to the second power. That power tells you how many times to take the base number of -4 and multiply it. So I've got 1, 2. -4 times -4, using my little Dorito here, a negative times a negative leaves me a positive value. Here's -2 to the third power. Another way to say that is -2 cubed. That means I take my base and multiply it 3 times. Same base, 3 times. -2 times -2 is +4, and +4 times -2 is -8. And it gets tricky with a equal sign and a negative, so make sure you're really neat. I've been finding that my students write kind of messy, and it's hard for me to tell what their numbers are. Okay, so if you know anything about golf, you know that par is what the course thinks you should get for the course or a hole. And if you have fewer strokes than par, you get a negative score. It's one of the only times I think that negative is a good thing, other than your COVID test. So if Rory shoots a 65 and par is 70 for the round, what is Rory's score? Well, the golf course thinks you should take 70 strokes to complete their course. Rory was under that, which means he's negative. How far under? 5. So his score is -5. That's a really good score. He did better than the course thought you should do. If each round Rory scores the same, what's his score after 3 rounds? Well, if you want to do the same thing over and over, that's a multiplication problem. 3 rounds times a score of -5, he's now going to be -15. So he's under par, 15, -15. That will lead you to homework 5 to do some practice, and I hope that this helped. If only I could get it to stop recording. There we go.